CJ Flyer back with another YouTube video. Luka Doncic has been on an absolute tear to start his time with the Los Angeles Lakers, including the clutch overtime win against the New York Knicks last night. He had a couple of impressive jump shots over Karl-Anthony Towns in the overtime period. The playmaking has been impressive. The shooting has been there. Luka is starting to look a bit like his old self. But in today's video, we are not going to be talking about his offensive abilities. We're actually going to focus on what I believe is the most underrated part of Luka's game. Not the shooting, not the playmaking, not the ball handling, the shifty movements. No, we are talking about Luka's defense, which, according to the national media for the last few years, Luka's apparently bad at defense. And a lot of folks seem to buy into this narrative. Now, before you dislike the video for disagreeing with me here, please, I encourage you to watch it through. I encourage you to do your own research as well. And, do some analysis before coming to the conclusion based on what you hear on First Take on ESPN or some other sports talk show. Please, I encourage you. Because Luka, I'm not saying he's like a top 10 defender in the league by any means, but he is definitely an above average defender. And we are going to start not with what he's been doing with the Lakers so far. I want to start in the playoffs last year. Now, of course, as many of y'all probably already know, Luka was the leader in total points, total rebounds, total assists, and total steals across the entire 2024 NBA playoffs. But of course, having stat totals, while it is impressive that he was able to do that for all 22 games that the Mavericks played, what are the point per game totals? What's the assist per game total? You know what? I feel like per game can also tell more of the story. Obviously, the totals are impressive in their own regard, just due to the fact that he's playing with two busted knees in the playoffs and still able to put up all these stats and lead the league. However, with the steals, is that even impressive? 41 steals in total? I think we have to at least consider what's the steals per game, right? So this is where I want to start. We're just going to start with the basic defensive stats. And with the steals per game, as you can see, Luka's number 2. 1.9 steals per game across the 22 games played in the playoffs, Dallas Mavericks. And when you combine that with the total number of steals, I mean, as far as steal leaders go, LeBron's, it's impressive. He had 2.4 steals per game. They only played the one playoff series. So, only across 5 games. And not to say that it's not impressive, but Luka did this over 22 games through injury. All right? And then if we look at the total steals, who comes next, right? Anthony Edwards, who made the Western Conference Finals. You got Jaylen Brown in there. You got Drew Holiday and Jason Tatum, who also made it to the NBA Finals. You got Derek White, also made it to the NBA Finals for the Celtics. And Drew Holiday, who's widely considered one of the better defenders in the league, getting 21 steals over 19 games as opposed to Luka's 41 steals over 22 games. I mean, that has to mean something, right? First off, I think this just shows that the Celtics have great team defense, which, maybe that's another underrated part of their game, considering all the focus on the Celtics seems to be their great ball movement and their offense and how they're able to spread the floor. But besides the point, I think this just shows how great Luka's stealing ability was in the playoffs last year. And not only do I want to talk about steals, because steals is a very basic stat, and it can be swayed one way or the other. Like perhaps it's due to some elaborate team defensive scheme or some kind of play made by a teammate that forced the steal, but the other player still credited with the steal, yada yada. So let's consider other stats here, right? Defensive rating. Now, I am not entirely sure how Basketball Reference calculates defensive rating. The basic way to calculate defensive rating is just taking the total number of points allowed by the defense while players on the court, dividing it by the total number of defensive possessions, and multiplying by 100. But as you can see, there's a couple other formulas for estimating defensive rating as well. I know that Basketball Reference uses a more elaborate formula, whereas NBA.com just uses the basic one where it's, possessions while the player's on the court and how many points were scored. So This one's a little bit more elaborate. It says here estimate of points allowed per 100 possessions, and Luka's 35th. Okay, and again, this is 2024 NBA playoffs, and there's a number of these guys in the top 10, top 20 here that only played in the range of 1 to 7 games. So, how meaningful is the defensive rating for Matt Ryan, him being number 1, but he only played 3 minutes. Same with Giannis's brother. He only played 5, so you got to take that into the equation, right? And unfortunately on Basketball Reference here, I would have to export this sheet into Excel to be able to start filtering through different categories here. But if we were to take out players that played less than 20 minutes per game here, I mean, Luka, that pushes him up, probably into the top 20, top 25 as far as defensive rating goes. And that's out of how many players we got here? We got, I believe, well over 200. Yeah, over 200 players mentioned here for the playoffs. So I think that's impressive in its own regard, personally. Now, there's another video, not my video, not my YouTube channel. I've never talked with this guy, but it's someone I want to shout out, and a lot of his content is satire. But if you want to see more about, Luka's defensive abilities, not just limited to steals per game, not just limited to defensive rating, not just limited to like defensive win shares or other stats that you can find yourself on Basketball Reference. I'm only showing a couple of them here for this video. This isn't going to be a full breakdown of all the stats. I just wanted to highlight a few things for some people that think Luka's not a good defender. But if you want to see some highlights broken down as far as Luka's, defending abilities in last year's playoffs with the Mavericks, I'll put this video in the description. I recommend you check this out. Now, again, this guy's content, there is a bit of satire here, and he does sometimes yell very absurd phrases just to kind of draw attention, draw the viewers' attention and get clicks and whatnot. If you're not a fan of his commentary, you can always mute the video, but I still recommend you watch this just to watch Luka's defensive, plays here throughout the playoffs. Something I hear getting mentioned a lot as far as Luka's defense is, now that he's gained weight, it's been a bad thing. I actually think in some regards, Luka's weight gain has been a net positive as far as the defense goes. Obviously not so much for staying in front of a defender per se, but his body size now, I mean, he's able to hold his own against some of the bigger offensive players in the league. Having that added weight, it's honestly like you guys got to watch the videos, okay? You got to watch these highlights, and please make your own judgment. Don't just buy into what I'm saying without looking at the plays yourself. But him having the bigger body really helps him down low. And then, again, it's not necessarily a net positive as far as him being able to stay in front of a perimeter offensive player. But being a bigger body and having the added weight and strength, it does make it hard at times. If he's able to move his feet and get in front of the player in time, you'll see a couple of plays where it just stops the player cold. So I encourage you to check out these clips. Again, link in the description. Now, I want to talk about this current regular season because I don't want this to just be a, Luka only tries in the playoffs type of video, because I know that's where people's minds are probably going right now is, you're just pulling up the playoffs and Luka went full try-hard mode. That seems to be an ongoing narrative in general with NBA players is they don't try in the regular season. But look, we're gonna dismiss that here in a little bit, or I'm gonna try to. So looking at the 2024-2025 NBA regular season, I had to uncheck the hiding non-qualifiers because obviously Luka's not going to be able to reach 65 games played this season because of his injury. So I had to uncheck this box. As you can see, players that only have 1 game played, 10 games played, so on and so forth, they get thrown out of the mix immediately. Unfortunately, I have to lump them in here just again because I didn't export the data into Excel for this video. So Basketball Reference doesn't allow you to filter based on different categories, at least as far as I can tell. If someone wants to correct me in the comments, please, I encourage it. But just looking at defensive rating for all of the NBA players in the league, regardless of games played, minutes played, etc., where does Luka rank? He is 87th. And again, that's with 32 games played. That's averaging, gosh, that's got to be at least 30 minutes per game, right? And then you look at all these players mixed in here that, 5 games played, 6 games played, 6 games played, 9 games played, 2 games played. Like if you were to take them out, he probably falls into the top 50, I would imagine. If we keep scrolling down just to see how many players, 87th out of how many, we're looking at 551 players in total, just to get a rough idea of where he's at for defensive rating as far as compared to the rest of the league. So 87th with a defensive rating of roughly 110. They don't show decimals on Basketball Reference either for whatever reason. So if we wanted to just focus, on NBA.com, we can do a bit more filtering. Again, defensive rating on NBA.com, it's just the basic calculation versus Basketball Reference has a more elaborate calculation. So it's not the same defensive rating, but it's similar. If we look at just the last 10 games while Luka's been on the Lakers, and we look among players that have played 20-plus minutes per game, unfortunately, they don't update the ranking numbers here, so we'd have to count here, and I think it's roughly 25th is where Luka falls over the past, how many? He's played 9 of the last 10 games, it seems, and that puts him, where's the defensive rating number? 105, 104.9. That's good. That's good. Now, its defensive rating is a bit difficult in terms of determining, like how good it is. I think it's good for comparing to other players across the league within the given season. But if you were to compare historical values of defensive rating this season to, say, even like 5 or 10 years ago, just because of the fact that NBA offenses are scoring more points, it gets a bit skewed. You really can't compare numbers to seasons of 10 to 20 years or more past. So again, this is just kind of to show, hey, he's above average. Okay, he's a good defender. He's not the best of the best. Got to give Nico Harrison credit. The trade they made does improve the defense when Anthony Davis is available. I guess that's the only thing we can give him credit for with that trade, right? But to say Luka's a bad defender I think that's an incorrect statement. So again, looking at steals per game, that wasn't just something that Luka did during the playoffs last year. He's been continuing to do it again throughout the regular season this year. Again, I had to hide non-qualifiers, because Luka's not going to hit 65 games played this season out of 82 games. But even with the non-qualifiers shown, Luka's third. He's third in the league in steals per game, averaging 2 steals per game. Shout out to Dyson Daniels, by the way, for the Atlanta Hawks. This is way off topic. I made a video about the Hawks and the Pelicans, and I thought the Hawks didn't get the best return for DeJounte Murray, but they did good. Dyson Daniels is a solid defender. Anyways, Luka Doncic, 2 steals per game, still getting it done. And then if we look at just the last 10 games, once again, looking at steals per game, he's still right up there. 2 steals per game, 7th in the league because we got Chris Dunn and Fred VanVleet. Well, Fred VanVleet in one game got 3 steals. He hasn't played that much. But you get the point. He's still one of the better defenders as far as steals per game is concerned. He got 4 steals in the game against the Knicks last night. I'm going to share the links to those highlights in the description as well, in addition to that video of his defensive highlights from the playoffs last year. So, all in all, one other stat. Gosh, before I end the video, there's one other stat. I totally almost forgot about this. And this one, I think, is a pretty good indicator as well, is defensive field goal percentage. So, what is defensive field goal percentage? It is basically the percentage of shots an offensive player makes that's being guarded by, how do I explain this? Basically, Like, let's say, I'm just making up numbers at this point, but like, let's say LeBron James in a pickup basketball game, his opponent, the guy he was guarding, made 30% of his shots. Then his defensive field goal percentage is 30%. So Luka here, or sorry, the stat, what's typically considered to be good, okay, is around 45% or lower, according to Google AI's response. Now, Google AI, not perfect by any means, okay, sometimes gets things wrong, but just generally speaking, and it's pulling from StatMuse, it's pulling from some reputable, sources here, it seems, as far as basketball stats. So we'll take their word for it, just with this response. And I would think that 45% or lower is pretty good, because it's not just points in the paint or shots in the paint that are being attempted here. This also takes into account three-pointers, and that's where defensive field goal percentage can get a little bit skewed sometimes, because if you got a big that guards players on the perimeter a lot, then it can kind of mess with their defensive field goal percentage. Anyways, or vice versa. If you got a big that's in the post a lot, because field goal percentage is generally higher for points in the paint. Anyways, Luka's is 44.8%. We just saw the Google AI response said 45 or lower is considered good. So there you have it, okay? Just another stat to throw out there. I got a lot of numbers, but I got some highlights as well. So I mentioned earlier, Luka's been using his size to his advantage in the paint. And one other thing you'll notice in the highlights from the game against the Knicks last night is he is really good at reading the offense and determining when he should jump into the passing lanes to make some steals. And it's not just last night's game that he did this. He does this fairly frequently. It's how he's able to average 2 steals per game. And this is why, again, I'm not saying he is the best defender in the league, but I think it's hard to argue from the data shown from multiple different metrics here. Luka's definitely an above average defender. Don't listen to the media narrative. It's starting to turn around now because he's on the Lakers and he's the golden child of the NBA once LeBron leaves, now that he's on the Lakers. But don't believe the past narrative. I'm sure there will be a narrative coming soon that says Luka's defense has improved. It's always been good, okay? Don't get it twisted. Don't listen to that noise. Do your own research before you listen to, believe exactly what I'm saying as well. I want you all to look it up yourself. I'll link a couple of the stats websites as well. Let me know what you think about Luka's defense in the comments below. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you're interested in more NBA discussion, click one of the videos on your screen right now.